Welcome back, everyone, to part 6 of the Path to Pearl Harbor. Fantastic new series from Extra History. This is the day of infamy, so we are on to the attack on Pearl Harbor itself. If you have not seen the first 5 episodes of my reaction to this, there's a link in the description that will take you back to the combined episode 1 and 2 reaction, and you can watch it from there. I'll also put the link to the original content so you can check that out and support them as well. Let's dive right in.
Hulu, Tuesday, December 2nd, 1941. Japanese spy Takeo Yoshikawa senses war closing in. A delegation of Japanese specialists had come to survey Pearl Harbor, leaving him a list of questions. And he found the answers to them via observation, gossip, and local media reports.
And let's remember here, this is December 2nd, so I think November 26th, the Japanese fleet gets the go-ahead to launch the attack. I believe that's the day they left their home port. So this attack's a go at this point, 5 days before the attack. He's getting last-minute intelligence, not as a contingency. This is happening.
But now, a message comes from Tokyo, ordering him to report daily what ships are in port, whether the harbor has barrage balloons, if there are any anti-torpedo nets. Yes, his mission is definitely nearing its end.
So why torpedo nets? Because, well, obviously they're using torpedoes for the planes, but also they want to protect against submarines, because the Japanese do actually send this little mini sub into Pearl Harbor, and it's actually the first shots of the war for the United States are fired. I think it's the USS Ward, who fires on and sinks this Japanese mini sub.
He even passed some espionage duties to a German-American agent loyal to Nazi Germany. Still, each day he listens to the weather report on Radio Tokyo, waiting to hear these specific words: east wind, rain. The coded message that meant Japan was at war with the United States. And he won't have to wait long, for Admiral Nagumo's strike force is already a third of the way to Hawaii. Thanks so much to Factor for keeping us well fed on a busy schedule. Wednesday, December 3rd, the Oval Office. Roosevelt has been meeting regularly with Navy leadership. Japanese fleets are moving into Southeast Asia, but no one knows what the target is. One group of 6 carriers has simply disappeared. The general consensus is that Japan will strike Malaya, Hong Kong, or the Dutch East Indies within days.
If you're an intelligence person, though, that's got to frighten you a little bit. When you completely lose track of carriers like that, and you know they're headed somewhere, but you have no idea where.
Some even fear that they're planning a surprise attack on the Philippines, though that's a minority opinion.
And we have to remember, for those who aren't familiar with it, the Philippines is a U.S. territory at this point. This is where MacArthur is, with a pretty large American presence.
Roosevelt then meets with the British ambassador and finally gives him the answer he's been begging for. If Japan attacks British or Dutch territory, America will support their fight. Later that day, Stanley Jones, an old friend of Roosevelt and a missionary to Japan, visits him, and in his pocket is one last gambit for peace, cooked up by Ambassador Nomura and Special Envoy Caruso, using Jones to get around the increasingly hostile Cordell Hull. Caruso wants Roosevelt to go over the heads of the militarists and cable the emperor directly, offering to negotiate an end to the war in China. Hull dislikes this idea. The FBI has reported smoke at the Japanese embassy. They're already burning documents. War could start any minute. Though, after considering, Roosevelt decides he will send the cable.
You have to try, right? I mean, you have to do everything you can. If there's an opportunity for a last-ditch piece, but by this point, it's pretty clear that the odds are pretty heavy that you're going to war. It's just a matter of when and how and where this is going to happen first.
One last chance at peace. And if he had sent it that day, it might have arrived in time to make a difference. Instead, he'll send it the evening of December 6th. Thursday, December 4th, Tokyo. For hours, Tojo's cabinet has been drafting a response to Hull's list of demands that we mentioned last episode. And the reply they're crafting is a 14-point statement of grievances, with the last one being the most crucial, saying America's position has made further negotiation impossible. It severs diplomatic relations, with war inferred.
So, we've tried, but peace is impossible, and it's your fault. Pretty typical stuff that either side would probably say.
Rather than declared. The foreign minister hates this. He insists the statement be delivered before the strike. The honor of Japan depends on it. Yeah, the Navy says they'll get back to him on timing.
So you have to understand, I mean, the whole point of this Japanese attack is that they know long term they can't win a war against the United States. This is all about surprise and a quick strike that cripples the American Pacific Fleet and buys Japan time to get in a strong enough position to negotiate a settlement with the United States. They know they can't win long term. And so any advantage the Navy can get in that, even if it means launching a surprise attack when the U.S. isn't ready for it. But what the Navy's not thinking about here is the downside of this, that you are angering the American public in a way that's going to unite them behind this war significantly. Because, otherwise you might have a situation where the U.S. is, they've been pretty isolationist, and maybe a lot of people are still not 100% convinced that we really need to fight this. But when the Japanese do what they do the way that they do it, that leaves no doubt to the American people. They want revenge, they want to get back at them, and they want to do it now.
The timing of the attack is still secret after all. And then, a full day later, they finally respond. The statement must be delivered at precisely 1 p.m. Washington time. They also say the foreign ministry should wait and send the 14th part, the one breaking off relations, until just hours before the attack. Saturday, December 6th, Washington. Dorothy Edgers is a Japanese translator in the Navy's cryptographic section and is working the weekend to catch up on magic intercepts. The program is understaffed, subject to Army-Navy turf battles, and, frankly, intercepts more than they can decode and translate. Now there's some low-priority messages out of Honolulu that need seeing to. Of course, those communications are probably mostly commercial rather than diplomatic, but she's not one to let things stack up. She sees one from December 2nd, where Tokyo asks about barrage balloons and torpedo nets, then a reply the next day about a German agent in Hawaii. But when the head of the translation section, Lieutenant Commander Alvin D. Kramer, arrives that afternoon, he isn't alarmed. Edgers is new to this work. He's seen stuff like this before. Japanese consulates monitor ship traffic at every port. He mostly nitpicks her rough translation, then decides it isn't good enough to pass on.
So this is one of those situations where if people had all the pieces of the puzzle, they'd put it together, right? If the guys in Washington knew about this conversation, that would mean more than it does to these two, right? And if these two were aware of what the folks in Washington knew, they would be taking this much more seriously. But everybody's got a little piece of the puzzle, and it's not, there's not enough cooperation going on. Same kind of thing happened on 9/11, for example, where you've got different government agencies that all have pieces of a puzzle that if they had been communicating better together, they might have known what was happening.
Go enjoy your weekend, he says. We'll finish this up on Monday. Meanwhile, across town at the Japanese embassy, the first 13 parts of the statement start to come in. But there's a goodbye party for one of the embassy staff, and the senior secretary only gets partway through the decryption before he's pulled into a ping pong tournament. And the history books don't tell us whether he won or not.
Ping pong. Sometimes history hinges on ping pong, right? I mean, little things like that have huge ramifications that nobody realizes at the time.
But back at the Navy cryptographic office, Kramer now also receives the 13-point statement, intercepted when it was sent to the Japanese embassy. Recognizing its importance, he jumps up, and not having a staff car, gets his wife to drive him to the White House. Reading the statement and its belligerent tone, Roosevelt then says, "This means war." As emergency calls go out, with military officials being pulled out of theaters and called away from dinner parties, everyone in Washington now knows something's up. Sunday, December 7th. Around 8 a.m. Washington time, the 14th and final part of the statement breaking off relations, and the instructions saying it must be presented to Hull at exactly 1 p.m., arrives at the Japanese embassy. And as before, it too is intercepted, and Kramer gets a decrypted copy. And when he sees there's a delivery time specified in the instructions, his bad feeling gets much worse. Meanwhile, at the Japanese embassy, Nomura is freaking out. The decryption staff has all gone home to nurse hangovers, and it's 10 a.m. before he can get anyone back to decrypt the instructions.
The party from the night before still having an impact today. I knew some of this. I didn't know about that. I knew there were some decryption issues.
And that's when he finds out about the 1 p.m. delivery time. That is not enough time to work this document. He has to carefully translate this formal declaration to English before presenting it to Hull. Okay, Panicking, he calls Hull's office. Can he please get a 1 p.m. appointment?
Oh, sorry, sir. Secretary Hull has a lunch meeting. Could you possibly do 2 p.m.?
No. He insists it must be no later than 1 p.m. And with that, gets the appointment. Nomura hovers over his senior secretary as the man, who can't type, mind you, it's more of a hunt and peck kind of action, translates the first 13 parts of the statement from Japanese to English. He finishes, but there are so many errors, it's nearly illegible. They start retyping the entire thing. Meanwhile, American leaders are frantic over the possible significance of the 1 p.m. delivery of that last ominous message. Why so specific? Was an attack imminent? Sabotage, perhaps? They send warnings to the Philippines and the Panama Canal, but weather conditions mean that Hawaii can't be raised. And with phone messages possibly being tapped, exposing the fact that the purple code is broken, they instead opt to send a Western Union telegram.
A telegram, which goes into somebody's box and not read right away.
They forget to mark it urgent. At 6:30 a.m. Hawaiian time, at the mouth of Pearl Harbor, a destroyer spots the conning tower of a submarine. They sink it and then send a warning to headquarters, though it's dismissed. After all, jumpy captains were always mistaking driftwood or turtle heads for periscopes. Then at 7:06 a.m. Hawaiian time, a radar unit picks up a wave of airplanes inbound. They call it in and are told not to worry. It's a flight of B-29s transferring in. They're just early.
Think that's a little mistake on our extra history friend's part. I think they were B-17s. I don't think B-29s existed yet in 1941. Very rare that we catch them making a mistake like that, or maybe just, I don't know them. I know they do a lot of lies episodes, so maybe this is going to be for one of those.
Meanwhile, in Washington, it's 12:30 p.m., and Nomura is losing his mind. It's only 30 minutes until their meeting with Hull, and he's just been handed the decrypted 14th part, breaking off relations. In addition, Tokyo has just sent corrections to the first 13 parts of the statement, and now multiple pages have to be retyped.
Jeez.
They're going to be late for their 1 p.m. delivery. In Honolulu, civilians wake in confusion. Smoke rises over Pearl Harbor, and airplanes buzz across the sky. Okay, what idiot scheduled a big naval exercise on a Sunday morning of all times? Yoshikawa knows different. He rushes to the consulate just in time to hear the weather report. East wind, rain. 10 minutes after he's done torching his codebooks and all evidence of espionage, armed FBI agents break down the door. He raises his hands and identifies himself as a diplomat. Now, much later, he'll return to Japan on a diplomatic exchange, his activities not revealed until decades later. Rather, Japanese Americans, who he never enlisted as agents because he found them too loyal to the U.S., will be blamed instead.
True, and there's a couple of things about this, and granted, we all know in hindsight that it was abhorrent what was done to Japanese Americans with the internment camps, which, by the way, very few Japanese Americans in Hawaii were interned. Most of the Japanese Americans who are interned are going to be on the mainland. There's a lot of reasons for that, one of which is that there's already martial law in Hawaii, and so they feel more confident in the security that's already in place. There are other reasons as well, but like just a small number. There were Japanese Americans on Hawaii that were interned, though, just not a lot. And of course, we know that Japanese Americans fought bravely and superbly for the United States military, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, some of the best troops in the American Army during the war, fighting in places like Italy. And you got Daniel Inouye, who will become a senator, gets the Medal of Honor, a Japanese American fighting for the United States. So, but yeah, I mean, it's interesting how often this happens with espionage. The spies are covered up so well that sometimes it's decades or even longer before we find out. Washington's spy ring, the Culper ring, we didn't know the identity of some of the Culper ring from the 1780s until the last couple of decades. It's pretty intense stuff.
Washington, 2:20 p.m. Nomura and Kurusu enter Hull's office. They don't know that 15 minutes earlier, Roosevelt had informed Hull of the ongoing attack at Pearl Harbor, an attack neither diplomat knows about. Nomura stretches out his hand, but Hull does not take it. Instead, he flips through the 14-point statement and icily asks why it had to be delivered at 1 p.m. Nomura, apologizing for being late, says he doesn't know. And it's at this point that Hull launches into Nomura. In all of their dealings, he says, he's always been honest and straightforward. And he'd hoped Nomura did the same. Yet now, here, he brings this statement full of lies and distortions.
You gotta feel bad for Nomura because he's put in this situation where he really just hasn't done anything wrong. He just is the odd man out here. He's caught in the middle of stuff that is above his pay grade, that he had no involvement in the decision-making process, and he's got to be the messenger. Don't shoot the messenger. Well, this poor guy.
Then Hull dismisses them. Nomura, still confused, reaches out his hand to shake once more. This time, Hull accepts. Then they exit the office into a mob of press. The next day, Roosevelt would use their late delivery of the statement as part of his Day of Infamy speech. A speech that created a clean, righteous narrative out of the complicated, multi-decade breakdown of American-Japanese relations.
See, this is why these things matter so much, right? Like he said, it's complicated. It's been years of very nuanced negotiations and decisions and mistakes and demands and concessions. And all of that gets thrown out the window because they were late with the delivery of the declaration of war. That changes the entire narrative.
A story that began in the 19th century as two Pacific empires took their first tentative steps towards each other in a dance of imperial cooperation and collision, and a story that would be burned into the popular consciousness under three powerful words. Remember Pearl Harbor.
All right, that was good stuff. Let me know your thoughts. Use the comment section below. I've got a video coming tomorrow, my top 10 favorite historic sites that I visited in 2022. So hopefully you'll check that out. And then I'll have some more top 10 lists coming in the next week or so. So be watching for those as well. Thanks for watching.